There's a fine line between evolution and erosion, between a show growing up and growing apart from its roots. Young Sheldon, once the beloved prequel that captured the quirky genius of Sheldon Cooper during his formative years, walked that line for 6 seasons with remarkable finesse. But everything changed in season 7, when a single plotline derailed its narrative momentum, fractured its emotional heart, and, according to many fans and critics alike, ultimately contributed to its cancellation. Let's rewind. Young Sheldon began as a warm, semi-autobiographical sitcom meets drama hybrid that reimagined the early life of Sheldon Cooper, the socially awkward physicist made iconic by The Big Bang Theory. Anchored by Ian Armitage's nuanced performance and a surprisingly poignant family ensemble, the show balanced coming-of-age humor with Southern charm, presenting the Coopers as more than a backdrop to Sheldon's idiosyncrasies. They were the emotional glue. But in its final stretch, young Sheldon made a creative decision that fundamentally altered its DNA. It fully leaned into the impending death of George Cooper Sr., Sheldon's father. To longtime viewers and Big Bang aficionados, George's fate wasn't a shock. Adult Sheldon, portrayed by Jim Parsons, had referenced his father's death on numerous occasions, often with cold detachment or awkward anecdotes. For years, the creators of Young Sheldon had danced around this inevitable moment, building George Sr., played with tender depth by Lance Barber, into a more sympathetic, three-dimensional character than Big Bang ever implied. And therein lay the problem. The more lovable and real George became, the harder it became to reconcile his impending off-screen death. Fans adored this version of George. He was not the bumbling drunk Sheldon once described, but a devoted father trying to do right by a complicated son. When season 7 pulled the trigger and introduced George's death as a centerpiece of the plot, it didn't just break the hearts of the characters, it broke the show. What followed was tonal whiplash. Where young Sheldon once thrived on clever humor, familial misadventures, and quiet philosophical moments between a boy and his world, the post-George episodes took a darker, heavier turn. The charm dulled. The laughter felt sparse and strained. Grief is a powerful storytelling tool, but it's also a double-edged sword. When not handled with subtlety, it consumes everything in its path. The loss of George Sr. pushed the show toward something it was never truly built to be, a melodrama. Mary, the once spiritually grounded and often comic matriarch, became consumed by sorrow. Missy turned rebellious, which might have been an honest depiction of grief in adolescence but lacked the build-up to feel organic. Georgie's arc, meanwhile, leaned harder into adult responsibilities, erasing much of the comic mischief that made him a fan favorite. Even Sheldon, always emotionally detached, was left adrift. His signature cold logic no longer felt funny, it felt alienating in the face of such intimate tragedy. But the real misstep wasn't the death itself, it was the shift in focus. Instead of using George's passing as a way to deepen the ensemble's connections or explore new emotional terrain with balance, the show spiraled into a series of emotionally heavy episodes that felt disconnected from its earlier identity. The tonal shift wasn't gradual, it was a hard left turn, and audiences felt the whiplash. Worse still, the meta-structure of young Sheldon began to crack. Up until that point, Jim Parsons' voiceover as the adult Sheldon had served as a whimsical narrative device, offering future context with nostalgic charm. But post-George's death, his narration felt dissonant, either too light for the gravity of events, or eerily absent when insight was needed most. Fans began to wonder, was this still Sheldon's story, or had the show lost sight of him altogether? Behind the scenes, murmurs of creative fatigue were growing. CBS, once bullish about the show's prospects, began floating the idea of spin-offs rather than extending the main series. Rumors circulated that the cast, many of whom had grown up during the show's run, were ready to move on. The show's tonal confusion and declining ratings after the George arc did nothing to quell those discussions. By the time CBS announced that Young Sheldon would conclude with season 7, the decision felt both sudden and inevitable. Creatively, the show had written itself into a corner. How do you go back to lighthearted family moments after the emotional climax of a father's death? How do you re-establish rhythm when the heartbeat is gone? Some argued that Young Sheldon simply grew up, just as its characters did. But others saw the show as a cautionary tale about chasing authenticity at the expense of identity. There's no doubt that George's death was necessary to align with the broader canon. The problem wasn't that it happened, it was how it happened, and how the show failed to adapt after. Still, even in its final moments, Young Sheldon left behind a legacy of clever storytelling, heartfelt performances, and quiet wisdom. It gave us a version of Sheldon Cooper that felt more human than his adult counterpart ever did. It painted a fuller picture of life in East Texas, with all its quirks and contradictions. And yes, it made us cry, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes out of frustration. In the end, the plot that led to young Sheldon's cancellation wasn't just about a death, it was about the loss of balance, the delicate balance between sentimentality and levity, growth and consistency, plot and character. When George Cooper Sr. died, young Sheldon lost more than a character. It lost its compass, and for a show about a boy who knew everything about the universe, that loss made all the difference. Let me know if you'd like a visual version or quotes from cast, creators to embed.